Hello and welcome, everyone, back to the MLB Rundown. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @bchad50. And I'm joined by CBSSports.com's RJ White, and you can follow him and tweet at him on Twitter where he posts as @RJWhite1. A lot of interesting arms that you wrote about in this week's Riding the Wave, adding the right young starting pitcher. There's a number of intriguing arms out there, but you led off with one that really caught my attention, and that's Vincent Velasquez of the Houston Astros. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about him?
Well, Velasquez is representative of a new philosophy in Houston. The Astros jumped out to a big lead in the division this year, and while they've regressed recently, they certainly appear to be staking 2015 as a season they begin to shoot for the playoffs on a yearly basis. As a result, they brought up Preston Tucker, they brought up Lance McCullers, and then they brought up the extremely hyped Carlos Correa, and now they've added Velasquez to the rotation. He uses 3 pitches to generate outs, and while his fastball and changeup are ahead of the curveball at this point, he can use the breaking ball to rack up strikeouts while keeping batters on their toes with his good velocity on the fastball. He managed to pile up 37 strikeouts in 26 1/3 innings across 5 AA starts before joining the Astros, and tossed 5 scoreless innings in his debut, albeit with 4 walks to go with his 5 strikeouts. He's not completely developed yet, but he's certainly a better option than the Roberto Hernandezes and the Scott Feldmans of the world for the Astros. Combined with Keuchel, McHugh, and McCullers, the Astros have set themselves up nicely if everyone can stay healthy. That's not really a given with Velasquez, as he's already undergone Tommy John surgery once, and he's dealt with other various injuries throughout his career. Still, he appears to be a risk worth taking, especially in dynasty leagues. I picked him up in advance of his first start. Didn't use him with his first debut start because I wanted to see how he adjusted to the league, but I'm pretty confident with him moving forward.
Yeah, I like that decision to add him, especially, in a dynasty league, he's a must-grab. I grabbed him in a 12-team mixed head-to-head keeper league where pitching is really thin. We've got fairly large rosters, so I grabbed him. I did the same as you. I watched. I kept him on my bench for the first start. And really the biggest knock that I've read about with Velasquez regarding scouting reports is just the struggles with staying healthy at times. The stuff gets great reviews. Fangraphs has his scouting report up with a 55 present fastball with a 60 future grade, 45 on the curveball. So that's just a bit below average to just a bit below average. But they expect it to progress to being above average. And then a 55 changeup with a future 60 grade. And this is all on the 20 to 80 scale for those not familiar with scouting jargon. But really bright future for him. But it looks like he has a chance to be a useful spot starter at the least in larger leagues, and in AL-only leagues, he should be owned because the strikeout upside is fairly good. And with just a 3.08 walk per 9, he was doing a pretty good job of controlling the strike zone at the AA level this year as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say go out and get him, even if you're not convinced yet, because those 4 walks with his first start are, take people back a little bit. But if all you're doing is cutting, one of the roster fodder type pitchers, those guys that are always on the waiver wire in 12-team standard leagues, might as well take a shot and see if he's something special.
Yep. Another arm that you discussed that I like as well, and he's certainly less hype. Not that Velasquez has had a ton of hype since he's come in behind all these other notable promotions for the Astros, but a guy who's a prospect with the Phillies and had some hype there, but seemed to really cool off after being dealt to the Twins before the 2013 season, and that's Trevor May. Pitched really well last year at the AAA level, posting a 2.84 ERA and 3.16 FIP in 18 starts, but then he got rocked, at least according to his ERA at the big league level, in 10 games pitched, 9 of which were starts. Posted a 7.88 ERA, but his underlying stats suggested that he was rather unlucky. And any big league pitcher that posts a near 80 ERA, you can assume is probably fairly unlucky. And 4.77 FIP and 4.38 xFIP would suggest that was the case. But even those numbers weren't terribly enticing, but really turned a corner this year. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about him as well?
Yeah, he was awful in the majors last season. I had him on my team. I had used a supplemental minors draft pick on him. I'm not going to go into all the intricacies of my dynasty league, but I basically had the chance to keep him for nothing in my dynasty league heading into this year, and I had no issue walking away from him and taking a gamble on another end of roster spot. He certainly played better than that level of talent so far, accumulating 55 strikeouts against just 12 walks in his 11 starts. He's been a little unlucky to post a 4.16 ERA as he owns a 2.81 FIP, but his xFIP is right in the middle at 3.61. The key to him to continuing to have that kind of success will be to keep racking up ground balls. helping to keep his home run rate low while attacking the zone and limiting his free passes. He's issued no more than 1 walk in 8 of his 11 starts thus far. I think he's worth a flyer, and I'd own him in redraft leagues over Velasquez, I think, at this point, and also over the 2 other popular pitching ads I highlighted, Chichi Gonzalez and Chad Bettis. In dynasty leagues, I'd still take Velasquez over May.
I'm gonna echo those sentiments. I think that May is a better pitcher for this year. Velasquez has the higher ceiling, but I love the strikeout to walk rate. And I mean, we're not talking Phil Hughes level, but look at Phil Hughes as an example of what you can do when you're pounding the strike zone like he is and racking up strikeouts at a solid clip. I mean, 20.9% strikeout rate, 4.6% walk rate, very, very good. And as you noted, the ground ball uptick is very helpful. Went from 35.7% last year, according to Fangraphs, to 40.5% this year. So almost a 5% jump in ground ball rate, which, granted, is not by any means elite, but it is certainly an improvement over last year. And look at Jake Odorizzi as an example of a guy who's succeeding more now by keeping the ball on the ground at a higher level. So I do like the May call. I think he's ownable in 12-team mixed leagues as a back of the rotation guy. I think I would kick a number of these waiver fodder guys as you put it to the curb in favor of May, because I really like the underlying stats with him.
Yeah, and I think Odorizzi is probably a pretty good comparison on him. You know, he's not going to be the ace of the fantasy, your fantasy team that's going to take you to the championship and just blow everybody else away. But he's definitely ownable, and he's definitely worth rolling out in most starts.
I agree. There's another young pitcher that you highlighted in the popular ads who isn't in the big leagues yet, but you're expecting him to be up soon, and I certainly understand it. Why don't you reveal this mystery man to the listeners?
Yeah, Steven Matz of the Mets has been outstanding in a tough environment for a pitcher this season. We're used to seeing even great prospects struggle a little bit at AAA Las Vegas, and while it isn't unheard of for a guy to post solid numbers there, Matz has gone a little bit beyond that. He made 11 starts and 1 relief appearance, going 6-4 with a 1.94 ERA and 75.27 strikeout to walk ratio in 74 1/3 innings. He has virtually nothing left to prove at that level, and all that remains is for Mets management to figure out how they're going to work him into the rotation. I've read in articles that they pretty much consider him proven. He's ready for the big leagues. They just need to figure out how their rotation shakes out. And once that happens, you figure the Mets will waste no time getting him to the majors. As they've given back their early division lead, they really can't afford to keep one of their 5 best pitchers in the organization on the sidelines. I'd certainly grab him now in all leagues, as losing a couple starts of a mediocre fantasy pitcher by casting him to the wire isn't going to hurt your team as much as passing on someone who could quickly become an every week fantasy starter the next few weeks would. I put his upside, far higher than the Mays and the Velasquez's, in that I do think he's that one of those guys that can come out and be a potential fantasy ace for a team in the second half.
And it's interesting. I mean, Noah Syndergaard got all the hype, and rightfully so. Fantastic pitching prospect, electric arm. But as the season's worn on, I've read anonymous scouts saying that they prefer Matz to Syndergaard, and that's quite high praise. We've already seen what Syndergaard can do. I'm not going to go that far because I do really like the upper 90s fastball and that hammer curveball from him. But Matz, the fact that he's getting that kind of praise from people, I really think is a good indicator of what kind of ceiling we're talking about with the left-hander.
I agree. It's time for fantasy owners. If they're looking at all 5 of those pitchers the top 4 pitchers that I highlighted in the article plus Matz, I grab Matz first because I really don't think he's gonna be out of the rotation for more than a couple more starts, if that. I'm
in agreement. On that note, let's wrap up the beginning of the pod and take it to the forum where we always do to get some good questions from the draft, trade, and keeper forum. The first one submitted by user CoolCat. I believe that's how one would pronounce KULCAT. 12-team points league. Would you deal Steven Strasburg for Lance McCullers?
I couldn't see myself moving Strasburg in a 1-for-1 deal for McCullers. McCullers still has plenty left to prove. Strasburg's on the disabled list, but it's not dealing with an injury to his throwing arm or shoulder, so you don't figure that it's going to be something that plagues him all year. Even though the numbers have been ugly this year, he's still striking out nearly a batter an inning. I'll put more confidence in seeing his 389 BABIP progress than in McCullers pitching like a fantasy ace all season, so I like Strasburg.
Yeah, I'm with you. I understand the frustration of owning Strasburg at this point, but you really can't sell any lower, and you can't buy any higher than you would be on McCullers. It really is kind of both bad ends of the spectrum there. And I do like McCullers. It's certainly not a slight against him, and I know you do as well. You said as much on the podcast, but I mean, if Steven Strasburg if this disabled list stint was what it takes for him to right the ship and get that BABIP back in check, maybe get his secondaries working like they have in the past. You're talking about dealing a fantasy ace for a guy who can carry your team in pitching for a player that really just isn't that in Lance McCullers. So I would pass on that deal. Suck up the frustration a little bit longer, unfortunately. Hopefully you will be rewarded for it with Strasburg coming back and pitching strong. The next question is submitted by M. Monteith. In a standard 5x5 head-to-head league, M. Monteith wants to know who we'd rather have at catcher for the rest of the year. And I found this an interesting question. Yan Gomes or Derek Norris? Entering the year, Gomes would be the no-brainer option, I would say. But as an everyday catcher and not a platoon option as he was in Oakland, Norris has really closed the gap. It's really close, but I would prefer Gomes ever so slightly. He plays in a better ballpark. We've seen Gomes total a 21-homer, 278 batting average season just last year. And I do have some concerns, whether warranted or not, that Norris may wear down with a full workload this year. He just hasn't done that. Catcher's a really demanding position. So my preference is for Gomes, but it's not a huge gap for me. What do you think?
I don't think there's a definitive answer here at this point. I can't clearly say one is definitely better than the other. However, I did face this choice in my league as I picked up Norris when Gomes went on the DL, and I had to choose between the two when Gomes was activated. I chose Norris. I like his walk rate in previous years. I think that he has more batting average upside than Gomes, despite the past results maybe saying Gomes should have the better average. Norris's line drive percentage is really low this season. You figure once it regresses to the mean, he could jump from being a 270s hitter to somewhat in the 290s or even higher. Conversely, Gomes, I think, he's been riding high BABIPs over the last few years. I think his average might be a little bit lower than what he's shown in the past. The team dropped Norris to fifth Thursday with Will Myers back in action, and while we have to wait to see where he ultimately ends up in the lineup, I still take his upside over Gomes. I think he might be hitting second tonight on Friday. So I like Norris at this point over Gomes.
It's close, and I certainly think you've got a case there. The other question from M. Monteith involves shortstops. They currently own Eric Ibar, and he's considering dropping him for one of Starlin Castro or Andrelton Simmons. I'd make the swap for Castro. What about you?
I think I would make the swap for Castro too. I'm not, adamant about that, but I like Castro a little bit more over the long term. I think he's hitting in a better lineup, obviously, than the other guys. I think he'll get more protection, and he's usually been in a pretty good lineup spot, overall. So I think I like Castro.
Yeah, again, this isn't one where I think it's a huge gap, but I think the ceiling for Castro exceeds that of the other two. So, yeah, we're definitely on the same page with that. Go ahead and cut Ibar and grab Castro if he's still available. The last question is submitted by user JBay038 in a 14-team head-to-head dynasty league with 6x6 scoring. This user's been presented with two very interesting offers. The first is Todd Frazier and Garrett Cole for Chris Bryant, and the second is Cole for Carlos Correa. To give the listeners a little bit of background, this roster is loaded with bats, but the rotation is more good than great. There are reinforcements on the way for the rotation, such as Matt Moore and Jose Fernandez, who will provide a shot in the arm when they are healthy. But I love the idea of getting Cole. I think both offers are fair, and I would take either. Which deal do you prefer?
I'm also a fan of both deals. I like the deal getting Frazier and Cole for Bryant better. We're all pretty convinced Bryant's going to be something special, but Frazier's already pretty special too, hitting 293 with 17 homers and 6 stolen bases this year. He's obviously older than Bryant, but at age 29, he should still have several good years in him, enough so that I'm not putting him that far behind Bryant long-term, at least, not to the level of value that Cole is. Speaking of Cole, who I would have called the developing ace if he didn't lead the league with 9 wins, a 1.73 ERA, and a 2.21 ERA plus. Maybe at the beginning of the year, you might not have thought of him in terms of this, but he's made it on the big stage at this point. There may not be 5 better pitchers worth owning in dynasty leagues than Cole. I think grabbing him is essential, but the reason I'm more willing to sacrifice Bryant than Correa on this particular team is that this team is starting Xander Bogaerts at shortstop. He's formerly an elite Red Sox prospect. He has yet to live up to his upside, though he has played a lot better this season, and he actually was hitting third, I think I saw in the lineup on Friday, so that would be interesting if he can stick higher in the lineup. I think Correa, though, is definitely ahead of him in terms of long-term fantasy value, so I would rather plug Correa into my lineup, add Cole and Frazier, and then look to trade Bogaerts in his high upside to the highest bidder, especially with him playing well right now. Try to get another starting pitcher and really strengthen that rotation.
And even if that owner doesn't deal Xander Bogaerts, I don't mind the idea of having 2 high upside shortstops on your roster and hoping that one pans out. I think Correa's ceiling obviously exceeds that of Bogarts, but Bogarts does seem to be settling in and playing at a higher level than he did last year. So I'm actually with you, and I was surprised that the responses to that question so far in the thread were all basically in favor of dealing Correa for Cole. But I'm with you. I really like Todd Frazier. I love Great American Ballpark. I think he's one of the guys that you can count on remaining with the Reds. I don't think you're going to see them move him. So I don't think there's a huge gap between Bryant and Frazier over the next couple seasons. And at this point, that's really what I'm looking for. And this roster is built to win now and win in the coming seasons with the addition of Cole and some development from Correa or Bogarts at shortstop.
And then another thing you have to keep in mind with Bryant is that we know he can handle third base, but it's still possible that they move him to the outfield because they just have so many good young infielders that it seems like they've toyed with the idea of playing him in left field and kind of stacking the infield with other players when needed. So we don't know. Maybe he does end up, moving to left field eventually. And as an outfielder, he carries a little bit less fantasy value than that of a third baseman. So that's just another something to keep in mind in a long-term league. You might not necessarily have found your third baseman of the next 15 years.
Yeah, definitely really good forward thinking with that point. And on that note, we're gonna end on a high note on the podcast. Thank you for joining me as always, RJ.
Thanks.
Take care, listeners, and good luck in your leagues.